Shinagogo, baby, what's good, guys? Yoku here, and in today's video I'm going to be breaking down the basics of combat. Now, I know a lot of us are used to RPGs, we're used to some gacha games and turn-based mechanics, so this type of content or this type of video might not be for you, and that's cool. I would love it if you still support the video because you like your boy, but if that's not the case, it's all gravy. This video is mostly for the players that I've expressed and learned about who are new to the genre as a whole. They're not familiar with RPG mechanics. They don't normally play turn-based games. And so a lot of these terms, a lot of these conditions, a lot of the things that happen in Star Rail are completely foreign to them. With that out of the way, let's break down the basics of combat in Honkai Star Rail. In the most simplest way possible, Honkai Star Rail's combat comes down to two main factors: what you do before initiating the battle, and then what you do during the battle. Before the battle, it's actually really easy to explain. Think of it like Persona, where if you played Persona at least, or if you haven't, I'll explain both. In Persona, you can attack the enemy, and if you attack the enemy outside of combat, that results in your advantage. Now in Persona's case, you start off with a multitude of things, right? In Persona 3, 4, 5, whatever, it's a little bit different, but it's all the same thing. Whether or not you start with the enemy being weakened, or they're already broken, or you get a crit, or they're knocked down, all of these different factors happen in other RPG games. So for those of us familiar with this, we understand that hitting the enemy prior to that results in our advantage. Now, Star Rail is a little bit different. In Star Rail's case, you need to hit the enemy with whatever they're weak to. If the element right above their head has a frost or glacial star looking symbol, that's ice, pop them with an ice attack. It doesn't matter whether it's a skill or an attack. You can do either, and then it will still result in the same thing. Now, this results in the enemy being broken a little bit. Now, some cases, depending on your strength, depending on your break damage, allegedly, I haven't been able to test this just yet, but it does hold a factor to this from what I've been studying. You can pop their toughness meter immediately depending on a lot of those factors. And for what you can see on your screen prior to engaging in combat, you will notice that there are going to be 3 at the beginning of the game and then 5 once you progress through the story. Little points. These points are called technique points right at the bottom right of the screen. Every character has a different technique they can use. Himiko, for instance, creates a zone of fire where each enemy in here has a 100% chance to take increased fire damage for 2 turns. A burning zone, if you will. Now, honestly, I would have loved if it was just burning all the enemies, but whatever. Yangqing and Dan Heng have some that increase their attack, and by how much percent is possibly up in the air at this point, I'll know officially whenever the game releases. Su Shang's, for instance, is immediately attacking the enemy doing damage, and once you enter the battle, it deals 50% of Su Shang's attack as physical damage to all of the enemies. So this goes into play with what I was mentioning earlier. If the enemy is naturally weak to physical, and you use Su Shang's technique instead of her basic attack, then it's going to deal 50% of Su Shang's attack to all of those enemies, which basically counts as a normal attack in the game, but it's hitting all of them instead of just one, potentially breaking their toughness meter depending on her versus them and the break meter or the break effect. Now, moving into the actual combat, you can see that a lot of things are on the screen now. The UI completely changes. I'll go from left to right. At the top left, you're going to see the turn order. This is basically telling you which character is going first, second, third, so on and so forth. And there's a number of factors that can change this, but for right now, I'll keep it as basic as possible. Character increased speed, that little icon for them goes higher up on the board. Character loses speed or gets impaired in any kind of way, whether that be freeze, imprisonment, entanglement, or so on and so forth, they go down on the meter. If they're broken, in this case the enemy, and their toughness meter is broken, they take some reduced speed, and then boom, they pop down 1 or 2 slots. Also, again, depending on the enemy. Some bosses just don't care. Moving to the right, you can see that which character or which enemy you're targeting is going to appear at the top right. You can click Z or whatever you're using, and then that'll give you a brief explanation of what's going on with that character, their buffs, their stats, their level, whatever the case may be. And then, of course, you have your auto battle towards the right of that. Speed up is 2 times the speed or 3 times the speed, your auto battle, and then pause. This won't be immediately available to everybody playing the game. You have to progress sometimes in the story or progress somewhat in the story before you can unlock that. Coming down to the bottom left, you're going to see your characters. C or whatever your controller, if you're using that, is going to open up your actual list for your characters to tell you the stats on them, if they're impaired, if they're buffed, anything like that. But this is pretty much where you're focusing most of your attention to, is the characters. You can see that they have their skills, they have their buffs right beneath them, they have their HP, and then when they have a shield on, then their HP has a white-ish glassy looking bar atop it, and then that's going to pretty much represent the shield. The color of their bubble is representing the element. So someone like Herda is going to be a light blue. Physical MC is going to be a whitish gray. So is Natasha, Clara, same thing. Zila is going to be a lightish purplish kind of color. Himiko is going to be a bright red, so on and so forth. These pretty much represent your element. The big circle is your ultimate. That's what you're, you know, boom, boom, click it, now I'm done. Ha ho, hoo hoo. Now over to your right is going to be another important factor. This is your skill points. These are pretty much what you're paying attention to at all times. You really never want this to go down to 0. The reason that you don't want this to go down to 0 is because then it means that you have been mismanaging your skill points, if you will, and that results in you not being able to dish out the damage per turn that you would want to dish out. And speaking of skill points, this is going to be the bread and butter of understanding the combat system. If I can bring you guys over to the team builder here on Pridewind for just a moment, I'll be able to show you a little bit better than I can tell you. So when it comes to this, you're going to see 7 cycles here. Give me just a moment. Now I'm building a team here of 4 different elements, and at the bottom you can see that there are going to be basic attacks used, which is right here, and then you will see skills used, which is right here. You can see 7 skill points generated, 8 skill points generated, 7 and 7. This is basically breaking down the combat system in the game. If Himiko uses 7 basic attacks, that means there are 7 skill points that I can use throughout X amount of time period. In a normal function, if you will, you're going to start off with 3. So let's just say that nobody can do anything until the beginning of the game. I have 3 basic skill points that I'm able to use, right, in my first turn. So Himiko goes and I use a skill. That means that this turns into 2. Theoretically, I've now used this skill, which means I only have 2 skill points left. So then I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Well, now it's Sampo's turn. I want to use Sampo's skill. Boom. Sampo uses a skill. I now have 1 skill point left, right? Oh, okay, cool. Well, now it's Bailu's turn. Bailu doesn't really need to heal, but I don't really know what I'm doing in the game, so I'm going to use her skill point anyway. Boom. I've used a skill point from Bailu. Now I've got all 3 skill points burned. That means I can no longer use a skill point. How this should operate is a little bit more like this. Now I can pay attention to my speed, and I can see that based off the speed values, Sushang is going to go first, and then Sampo is going to go second. Himiko is going to go last, depending, of course, on her speed, but right now we're talking about that. And then Bailu is going to go third. So how I would want to do it is this. Skill point here for Sushang, skill point here for Sampo, basic attack for Bailu. Now I'm at 2, right? Because I started with 3, I've used 2. Bailu uses a basic attack, which is going to generate a skill point for me. And now I'm back to 2. Himiko comes up, and then I use skill point. And this is, if you're familiar with Genshin, this is pretty much creating a rotation in your combat system. I don't like calling it a rotation because turn-based is completely different than anime, open world, action RPG, whatever. It's completely different because there are a lot of things that are just not in your control. When I'm playing Genshin Impact, I control if I dodge, I control if I do a regular attack, I control when my skill is up. The rotation is meant to be perfect. In Star Rail, in a turn-based game, you cannot have a perfect rotation. The game just doesn't allow it. Now, if you get a really lucky turn or really lucky cycle, awesome, you did it, congratulations. You can't recreate it. I can't beat the boss one way and then tell you if you do exactly what I did, you will also beat the boss. Crits come into play. No one misses, so I can't really tell you somebody's gonna miss. Freezes come into play. Break systems come into play. Stats come into play. There's a lot of things that go into that. So with a very basic understanding of what I'm telling you, use basic attack, generate skill point. When you're doing this for your team, you're playing the game, you're understanding it, right? The entire tutorial, that whole World 1, is getting you familiar with the game's combat system. There will be a lot of fights where you simply can't do anything, or rather you need to learn the system in order to be able to do something. Otherwise you get blown up. So with skill points being covered now, I can go over the rest of it. And you need energy for your ultimate, right? Everything creates energy for your ultimate, similar to Genshin Impact. Your basic attacks are going to give you 20, skills are going to give you 30, ultimates are going to give you back between 5 to 8 energy, kills give you 5 to 10 depending on the enemy and the character, so on and so forth. There's a lot of different factors here that are going to give you the energy back, and of course this all goes up or down depending on your energy recharge rate. Getting ready to wrap things up, we're going to talk about the toughness meter, because this is something that could confuse a lot of players. The toughness meter is going to be the white bar that's at the top of what's going on. This white bar at the top is pretty much going to dictate whether or not the enemy takes full damage or reduced damage. And if the enemy is, let's say, weak to fire and wind, then you're going to want to focus on using fire or wind elements to break that toughness meter. Once you break that toughness meter, then boom, it's going to smash. You're going to see big words break, and then now you can do your full damage on the enemy. Now it doesn't matter whose element is attacking the enemy. They're going to do the full damage for whatever they got going on. Unlike Pokemon or other RPGs, using the same element does not somehow increase the amount of damage that you would do to the shield or to the enemy. It just determines whether or not you can physically break the shield or do nothing. This is where a lot of your break builds, as I like to refer to them, will come into play, where you invest more into break instead of crit or any other stat. And then when you break them through the toughness meter, it does a huge amount of damage. Lastly, we can go over the elements, which are very quick, super easy to understand actually. Physical is going to give you bleed, fire is going to give you burn, ice is going to freeze and give you an ice damage over time, which most of these elements, by the way, are going to give you damage over time to their respective element. Lightning is going to give you shock, wind is going to give you wind shear, quantum is going to entangle the enemy. This is a little bit different. Entanglement means that the enemy can't, they're heavily delayed, right? They don't get to play the game. Quantum is very strong because it means that if I break you with this element, you no longer get to play the game. And quantum does damage over time. Imaginary inflicts imprisonment, which imprisonment is the same thing as entanglement. It means that you're heavily delayed and you do not get to play the game. But instead of doing damage over time, it reduces their speed. Imaginary, aka imprisonment, is the only element that when breaking the toughness meter does not apply damage over time. But honestly, that's it. I've explained the entirety of the combat system. I tried to break this down as simple as possible, so if some things were a bit confusing or harder to understand, feel free to ask me in the comments down below. There's no shame in that. I'm here to help you guys get better at the game. If you want more people to help you learn the game better, building teams, talking about strategy, if you get stuck on a boss, anything like that, feel free to join my Discord. I've had a lot of people join over the last couple of weeks, and I'm really just trying to foster a community where a lot of y'all just help each other get better at the game, because I know a lot of y'all are free to play. If you enjoyed this video, do feel free to subscribe if you like that kind of stuff. But like the video, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. I can't say my usual outro because it's inappropriate for YouTube. Smell you later.